Iran's top military commander inspected an underground missile base operated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Iranian state-linked footage appears to show a Khorramshahr 4 missile inside an underground facility, but the details cannot be independently confirmed. Iranian outlets and online accounts said state TV canceled a scheduled segment for security reasons. We cannot independently verify the internal reason. The reveal-then-cancel pattern fueled debate in international coverage and on open-source tracking communities. Reports say the talks between Iran and the United States hit a snag over venue and format, with Washington and Tehran describing the terms differently. These developments surfaced in the same period, but whether they are linked is unclear. What is clear is that Iran chose to show footage of its deterrent capability, and then chose to restrict that footage, a decision that can be read in multiple ways depending on perspective. From Tehran's view, both actions may serve strategic purposes. From Washington's, the timing raises questions. For observers, the sequence adds complexity to an already volatile situation where military signaling and diplomatic maneuvering are happening simultaneously. Cameras followed Major General Abdolrahim Musavi, Chief of Staff of Iran's armed forces, as he inspected what Iranian media described as rows of weapons inside an underground facility, accompanied by the commander of the IRGC aerospace force, according to Iranian state-linked reporting. Major General Musavi stated that Iran has significantly strengthened its deterrent power by upgrading its ballistic missiles across all technical dimensions, according to the Iranian reporting. The inspection was described as assessing the readiness of one of the strategic missile units belonging to the IRGC aerospace force. In the broadcast, Musavi used unusually forceful language suggesting a more aggressive posture, according to Iranian state-linked reporting. He referenced what Iran calls the 12-day war, and described revising Iran's approach to adopt what he characterized as asymmetric and crushing military strategies. The wording is more aggressive than Iran's usual public framing, though it is unclear if it reflects real operational changes. Military leaders often use strong language for domestic audiences and deterrence signaling that may not reflect precise operational planning. The Khorramshahr 4 is named after a city destroyed during the Iran-Iraq War, also known as Khaybar, after a 7th century fortress, according to Iranian descriptions. The naming blends historical memory with deterrence messaging, a pattern consistent with Iran's approach to its defense program. Iran says the Khorramshahr 4 has a 2,000-kilometer range. Other specs like payload come from Iranian claims and are not independently verified. These specifications, if accurate, would place Israel and U.S. military bases across the Middle East within range. The missile is described as powered by liquid fuel with a maneuverable warhead, designed to challenge modern missile defenses, according to Iranian reporting. Iran unveiled the missile publicly in 2023, while earlier development timelines are disputed across different reports. Some Iranian-linked accounts have suggested variants were used in past strikes, but we do not have independent confirmation of the exact missile type. Western assessments of Iranian missile capabilities sometimes differ from Iranian claims on specifications and operational history. Iranian outlets and online accounts said state TV canceled a scheduled segment for security reasons. An on-air announcement reportedly stated that a report regarding the unveiling of yet another of the IRGC's missile cities, which was scheduled to be broadcast tonight during the 8:30 and 9 p.m. news programs, will not be aired due to the strict observance of military and security considerations, according to the reporting. The decision to cancel the broadcast after footage had already circulated raises questions about internal decision-making. Whether the initial release was intentional signaling followed by a deliberate restriction, or whether the broadcast was canceled because it showed more than intended, cannot be determined from available information. The announcement reportedly confirmed the inspection took place while restricting the visual evidence. It can be read as deterrence messaging, but the motive for restricting footage is not confirmed. The reveal-then-cancel pattern fueled debate in international coverage and on open-source tracking communities. The sequence generated significant international attention, regardless of the internal reasoning behind the cancellation. Iran's decision to show footage of the Khorramshahr 4 inside an underground facility, even briefly, can be read as serving a deterrence purpose. The simple point: Iran wants rivals to believe an attack would trigger painful retaliation. The underground basing is significant because it suggests Iran's missile forces could survive a first strike, meaning that any attack on Iran would face retaliation from assets protected deep underground. By showing hardened facilities with long-range missiles, Iran communicates survivability and retaliatory capability. Iran does not possess nuclear weapons, but its conventional missile deterrent serves a similar strategic logic. By demonstrating that its missiles are protected and operational, Iran signals that military action against it would come at a severe cost. The timing, during a period of massive U.S. military buildup near Iran, gives the deterrence message specific context. Iran is responding to what it perceives as credible threats with demonstrations of credible retaliatory capability. Whether this stabilizes the situation or escalates it depends on how adversaries interpret the signal. The diplomatic track has encountered serious difficulties over the format and scope of negotiations. Axios and other reports say the sides clashed over venue and format. The U.S. favored the original setup, while Iran pushed for Oman and a tighter agenda. A U.S. official described Washington's stance as this or nothing, according to Axios, while Iran framed it as proposing different terms rather than walking away from diplomacy. The characterization of who moved away from the table depends on which account you follow. Reuters reports that negotiations in Oman will focus solely on Iran's nuclear program, with missiles off the table and regional militias not up for discussion, according to the reporting. Whether this represents a compromise or a narrowing that makes talks less meaningful is interpreted differently by each side. Reports say the talks hit a snag over venue and format, with Washington and Tehran describing the terms differently. The situation remains fluid, and whether the current difficulties represent a temporary impasse or a more fundamental breakdown is not yet clear. Iran's insistence on changes to the talks format reflects concerns that go beyond logistics. From Tehran's perspective, the difference between multilateral talks with regional observers and bilateral talks with the United States directly affects sovereignty and negotiating dynamics. Multilateral formats with Gulf states present risk, from Iran's view, of negotiations being shaped by countries that have interests in constraining Iran's capabilities. Bilateral talks give Tehran more direct engagement with the decision-maker, Washington. Iran's insistence that missiles remain off the table reflects a long-standing position. IRGC has stated that Iran's defensive and missile capabilities would not be part of negotiations, according to Reuters. Ali Bagheri, the foreign policy deputy at Iran's Supreme National Security Council, said Iran has no intention of transferring enriched uranium abroad, according to Iranian state-linked reporting. These positions are characterized by Western media as obstruction or preconditions. From Iran's perspective, they represent legitimate red lines. No sovereign nation is obligated to negotiate away its defensive capabilities under military threat. Rubio said any deal must cover missiles, regional proxies, the nuclear file, and human rights, according to reported remarks. The U.S. position encompasses issues that Iran has consistently rejected as exceeding the scope of legitimate negotiation. Rubio also acknowledged uncertainty about outcomes. "I'm not sure you can reach a deal with these guys, but we're going to try to find out," he said, according to reported remarks. "We don't see any harm in trying to figure out if there's something that can be done." "This is a president that always prefers a peaceful outcome," Rubio said. "If the Iranians want to meet, we're ready. They've expressed an interest in meeting and talking. If they change their mind, we're fine with that too." "We prefer to meet and talk," Rubio said, according to the reporting. The statement positions Washington as willing, while placing responsibility for any breakdown on Tehran. The gap between Washington's comprehensive demands and Tehran's narrow nuclear-only framework remains the fundamental obstacle. Whether the format dispute represents tactical positioning or genuine impasse depends on what happens next. Egypt warned that outside intervention would seriously endanger regional stability and urged diplomacy, according to official statements reported publicly. The position represents a significant regional voice pushing back against military escalation. We strongly believe that the resolution of all outstanding issues with Iran, including the complex nuclear file, through peaceful and diplomatic channels, remains the most accurate and appropriate path forward, the Egyptian statement said, according to the reporting. Egypt's warning against external intervention aligns with the position of several regional states that would be directly affected by any military conflict. The statement implicitly pushes back against military options that the Trump administration has kept on the table. Reuters reported Saudi Arabia said it would not allow its airspace to be used for attacks on Iran, and the UAE said it would not allow its airspace, territory, or waters to be used for hostile actions. These regional positions suggest significant resistance to military escalation among U.S. partners in the area. According to the Wall Street Journal, there is growing resignation across the region that a military confrontation may be unavoidable, and the scope of the talks is already shrinking. Behind closed doors, Middle Eastern diplomats say hopes are being downgraded sharply, the reporting states. What was once framed as a chance to cool tensions is now being described as little more than an exchange of ideas with no real outcomes, according to the Wall Street Journal reporting. Some officials go further, warning that diplomacy may only be delaying the inevitable. This pessimistic assessment from regional diplomats reflects the difficulty of bridging the gap between U.S. demands and Iranian positions. The characterization of talks as merely an exchange of ideas suggests expectations have fallen considerably. However, diplomatic pessimism and actual outcomes do not always align. Talks that begin with low expectations sometimes produce results precisely because both sides arrive aware of the consequences of failure. Whether this dynamic applies to the current situation cannot be predicted. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and presidential advisor Jared Kushner are expected to travel to Qatar, not to meet Iran, but to consult regional partners before returning home, according to reporting on the diplomatic developments. This suggests Washington is recalibrating its approach. U.S. officials say patience is running out, according to the reporting. If there is to be a deal, they insist it must be real. No side agreements, no delays, no narrowing the agenda. This framing positions U.S. frustration as the limiting factor. The Qatar consultations may represent preparation for continued diplomacy through different channels, or they may represent the diplomatic track winding down. Whether Witkoff's regional consultations lead to resumed talks or a shift toward other options remains to be seen. The involvement of regional partners in consultations, even as Iran has sought bilateral talks, reflects the multilateral dimension that complicates the process. Different regional actors have different interests in the outcome. The military dimension continues independent of the diplomatic track. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group remains in the region. Additional F-15E squadrons have deployed, and THAAD and Patriot air defense systems are reportedly being positioned across the Middle East. The Wall Street Journal reports U.S. officials say more air defenses are needed before any strike to protect bases and partners, with officials describing retaliation risk as a key constraint on timing and scale. This reporting suggests active planning for potential military action. Iran's display of underground missile facilities directly addresses this planning. The message is that U.S. air defenses may be needed because Iranian retaliation would be substantial, and that missile assets buried underground would survive initial strikes. The interaction between military positioning and diplomatic engagement creates a dynamic where each track affects the other. Military preparations provide leverage for talks, but also signal that force remains an option if talks fail. The missile base footage surfaced in the same period as other military incidents. The Wall Street Journal reported that Tehran combined diplomacy with what the outlet called provocation. An Iranian drone flew toward a U.S. aircraft carrier, and gunboats confronted a U.S.-flagged oil tanker. These incidents, covered in our previous reporting, involved an Iranian drone that CENTCOM says was shot down by an F-35C and IRGC boats that CENTCOM says threatened to board a tanker. Iran's state-linked media offered a different account of the drone incident, saying it conducted surveillance before losing contact. The combination of missile-based footage, drone surveillance, and tanker incidents creates a pattern that Western analysts characterize as escalation. From Iran's perspective, these activities represent defensive measures and deterrence signaling during a period of external military threat. The characterization depends on which actions are considered baseline and which are considered escalatory. If the US military buildup is the baseline, Iranian responses look defensive. If Iranian nuclear activities are the baseline, US deployments look defensive. This framing contest defines the narrative. The wording Mousavi used is more aggressive than Iran's usual public framing, though it is unclear if it reflects real operational changes. He described transforming Iran's approach from defensive to offensive after what Iran calls the 12-day war, according to Iranian state-linked reporting. The language about lightning fast and sustained operations and asymmetric and crushing strategies signals a more aggressive posture than Iran's traditional defensive framing, according to the Iranian reporting. Whether this represents actual doctrinal evolution or messaging cannot be determined from the statements alone. The shift in language is notable because Iran has historically framed its military posture as purely defensive. If this represents genuine doctrinal evolution, it could affect calculations on all sides. If it represents messaging, it still shapes perceptions and responses. Military leaders in many countries use strong language for domestic audiences and deterrence signaling that may not reflect precise operational planning. Mousavi's statements should be understood in this context. They are significant but not necessarily operational directives. The decision to restrict the broadcast after footage had already circulated can be interpreted in several ways, and the actual reasoning may combine multiple factors. It can be read as deterrence messaging, but the motive for restricting footage is not confirmed. One reading is that the initial release was deliberate, a signal to Washington and its allies, and the restriction was also deliberate, demonstrating that Iran exercises restraint and discipline over its disclosures. This interpretation suggests sophisticated information management. Another reading is that the footage showed more than intended about facility locations, missile configurations, or other operational details that adversaries could exploit. The restriction under this interpretation represents a genuine security correction. A third possibility is internal disagreement. One faction authorized the release while another ordered the restriction. Iran's system involves multiple power centers, and public messaging sometimes reflects competing internal priorities. The actual explanation may never be publicly confirmed. Regardless of why the broadcast was restricted, the core information has already entered public discourse. The existence of the underground facility, the apparent presence of the Khorramshahr 4 inside it, and Mousavi's statements have all been reported and discussed internationally. The footage circulated through social media and international reporting before the restriction, ensuring the deterrence message reached its intended audiences. This dynamic, where official restriction cannot undo informal distribution, is characteristic of information management in the digital age. Iran may have achieved both deterrence through the initial release and operational security through the formal restriction. The net effect is that Iran's adversaries are now aware of the underground capability while lacking the detailed footage they might have used for targeting analysis. From a strategic communications perspective, this may be an effective outcome for Tehran, though whether it was planned or accidental remains unknown. The debate over intent is itself part of the impact. Rubio said the United States is prepared to meet. If the Iranians want to meet, we're ready. They've expressed an interest in meeting and talking. If they change their mind, we're fine with that too. We prefer to meet and talk, Rubio said, according to the reported remarks. The framing of the situation as Iran backing away while the US remains ready serves Washington's narrative. Iran's framing that it wants talks on different terms rather than no talks serves Tehran's narrative. The reality likely involves both posturing and genuine disagreements. Reuters reports that talks in Oman will proceed with a nuclear-only focus, suggesting some form of engagement continues even if the comprehensive format Washington preferred has not materialized. Whether narrower talks can produce results is uncertain. The fragile diplomatic window exists alongside military positioning, surveillance incidents, and deterrence signaling. All of these tracks operate simultaneously, and any one of them could determine the trajectory of the crisis. Iran's decision to show footage of an underground missile facility during a period of maximum tension reflects a specific strategic calculation. The simple point: Iran wants rivals to believe an attack would trigger painful retaliation from assets that cannot be easily destroyed. By showing hardened underground facilities, Iran signals that any conflict would be prolonged and costly, not a quick surgical action. The calculation is that demonstrating deterrent capability reduces the likelihood of attack. If adversaries believe the costs outweigh the benefits, they choose diplomacy over force. This is Iran's argument for why its missiles are defensive, even when language shifts to more aggressive framing. Whether this calculation proves correct depends on how Washington and its allies assess Iran's actual capabilities versus its claims. The gap between what Iran displays and its operational reality is always uncertain, which is itself part of the deterrence equation. Ambiguity can serve deterrence purposes just as effectively as confirmed capability. Iranian state-linked footage appears to show a Khorramshahr 4 missile inside an underground facility, but the details cannot be independently confirmed. Iranian outlets and online accounts said state TV canceled a scheduled segment for security reasons. The footage had already circulated before the restriction. Reports say the talks hit a snag over venue and format, with Washington and Tehran describing the terms differently. A U.S. official described Washington's stance as this or nothing, according to Axios. Iran framed it as proposing different terms. Reuters says Oman talks will focus on nuclear issues only, with missiles excluded. Egypt warned that outside intervention would seriously endanger regional stability. Reuters reported Saudi Arabia said it would not allow its airspace to be used for attacks on Iran, and the UAE said it would not allow its territory to be used for hostile actions. Regional diplomats described expectations as collapsing, according to the Wall Street Journal. The missile footage, the canceled broadcast, the talks dispute, and the continuing military buildup all exist in the same moment. Iran is sending deterrence signals while keeping diplomatic channels open. The United States maintains military pressure while saying it prefers talks. The space between these positions, whether it widens into conflict or narrows into agreement, will be determined in the coming days.